I hope you had a great lunch. Diane, over to you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Drew. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to this afternoon's conference. My name's Diane Marr, and I've got the privilege of being the Network Development Manager for the Scottish Centre for Conflict Resolution. Many of you may know me, and if you don't, I really look forward to meeting you and continuing to work together going forward following this conference. You may not know, but the Scottish Centre for Conflict Resolution in real terms launched quite recently, and that was in April 2014 through in our first ever conference in Glasgow. And we had the privilege of MSP Aileen Campbell, the Minister for Children and Young People, being and speaking at that conference on the first day that our services went live. So it's a real privilege for us to be here today and welcoming Aileen back to address the conference. Just coming up for 2 years on in. The time's really limited that Aileen has with us today because of the pressures of business and parliamentary events. But I would just really like for you just to take a few seconds and to capture a real feel for what has been achieved in such a really short period of time. Our events that have been funded to be free at the point of use has seen 2,400 beneficiaries coming through our training, our events and our conferences, with 370 organisations across 31 local authorities entering in and participating in our events. We are really delighted around the amount of organisations that work with us, and we hope that continues to go forward. I think that's a real strength and it's a real opportunity too. And we're really showing an impact in terms of the skills, the knowledge and the understanding that people are beginning to benefit from around understanding conflict and access and mediation sooner rather than later. So without further ado, I would like you to give MSP Aileen Campbell a very warm welcome and back as our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here today. And before coming here, I was looking at the Centre's website and saw the quiz about keeping the heat.
Yes.
I think you saw that. I don't know if you've taken part. It's a quiz that you take through, and it assesses, I suppose, your characteristics. And I took part in that. I found out, because I did it a couple of times, that I was between a lion tamer and a contortionist. But perhaps with an election round the corner, it's a site that maybe some of our colleagues in the Parliament should visit before May's election. But I am incredibly pleased to be here today and to support the fantastic work of the Centre for Conflict Resolution. And today's theme of breaking the mould fits absolutely well with the portfolio that I am privileged to hold, because living a life filled with conflict should not be inevitable, and just because it's been doesn't mean we have to accept it or tolerate it. Conflict, as you all know, can be devastating, can be debilitating, and make life miserable, with the future looking permanently bleak. So we have no choice but to use our collective will to help Scotland break that mould and to escape the normalisation of conflict. And that is why we in the government are delighted to have this centre as a partner, as your approach is based on everything that we stand for as well. And that means early intervention, support and prevention, and also about working with people's assets to enable sustainable and lasting positive change. Now, during my time as Minister for Children and Young People, one of the people I've been privileged to work alongside is Sir Harry Burns, our former Chief Medical Officer, and I like the way that he describes that asset-based approach, moving people from being passive recipients of care to active agents of change in their own lives. And I think with that comment that he captures what I think we're all here trying to achieve, and making that sustainable and positive lasting change to make sure that we have happier and more content lives. But this partnership with the Centre has been backed with the success of this Centre's bid for resource via the Children, Young People and Family and Early Intervention Fund for 2016, and a further 2 years of funding guaranteed beyond that. And we're absolutely delighted that we're able to support the work of the Centre here through that fund. And I hope that this core funding for the Scottish Centre will allow you to continue with all the essential work that you carry out, not least the vital services that you provide to our children and young people and families right across Scotland. The ambition to be a national resource centre for best practice in conflict resolution, mediation and early intervention work is important in delivering our shared aspiration to create a fairer, equal and socially just Scotland. When I launched the National Parenting Strategy about 3 years ago, I used an analogy that I'd once heard, which I thought was incredibly apt for today, that children are like wet cement. Whatever falls on them makes an impression. And I think it's apt because it's absolutely true, because if we're serious about making Scotland the best place in the world to grow up, and I know that everyone here is, then we must recognise that getting it right in those initial years of our children's lives is critical. The early years offers us a really glorious opportunity to mould and shape a landscape of opportunity for every child in Scotland. And as parents and as stakeholders in society, we can make wonderful impressions in our nation's cement. And we must do everything that we can to ensure that all those impressions we leave are positive, because they'll last a lifetime. The earliest years are fundamental in shaping the people we become and how we develop cognitively, socially and emotionally. The approach that you have at this centre is built on the knowledge we have and are still amassing about those crucial early years of a child's life that begin in the womb, or as John Carnachan puts it, that the most important 4 years of a child's life are up to the age of 3. And in that sentence, he captures not only that we must do all we can to care for our bairns when they're born, but to care for them as they develop through pregnancy, and to help find positive ways to avoid conflict, to further entrench or normalise conflict for future generations. And we know that relationships can be strained during the early years of a child's life, which is why through our groundbreaking Early Years Collaborative, we have an approach based on what works, evidence, improvement methodology and practitioner empowerment. And we're currently seeing tests of change that look at income maximisation and parental support to improve relationships, increase family stability and tackle inequalities. And this work creates the environment our children need to be healthy, perform better at school, become more resilient in their response to challenge and develop into confident adults. But while I've mentioned specifically the importance of early years in a child's life, that doesn't mean that we should ever equate early intervention with only positive actions in the first few years of a child's life. We cannot simply write off children and young people in that way. Those adolescents, I believe, still need the scaffolding of our support so that they can go on to emerge to be confident adults and transition into independent living. And our parenting strategy, whilst it is and does have a concentration in early years, is also designed to capture parents of adolescents and also work with young people to prepare them as parents of the future. Because parents are the most important influencers and educators for their children, and it's right that we properly acknowledge that as a country. And as a government, we must ensure parenting as a priority area of policy work and development is supported. And the Scottish Government supports mediation and conflict resolution in a number of different ways. For example, some of you will know that we're currently working with our partners to update the parenting agreement for Scotland to make it more relevant to separating parents and families. Furthermore, we're continuing to support a wide range of stakeholders to ensure that services for families are available to help them make better choices about how they resolve their disputes, because we want to ensure that families have access to early information and assistance when they need it, so that problems can be resolved long before they escalate into crises. And we know that unresolved conflict within families can have a wide-reaching and devastating impact, which can sometimes lead to those affected becoming homeless and disconnected as a result. And that's why we've also strengthened housing rights for homeless households in Scotland, including for many young people. And many young people who may not previously have been entitled to settled accommodation now have this as a right. Despite this progress that the government has made in reducing homelessness, young people cover almost still a third of all homelessness applications in Scotland. And we know that relationship breakdown with family and friends remains the primary reason for young people presenting as homeless. And this has meant that the focus on homelessness prevention in recent years, developed through the housing options approach, has led to a renewed interest in the role of mediation services. And we're very pleased that with the funding from the Scottish Government, the Centre for Conflict Resolution has and will continue to develop best practice in mediation services across Scotland. But homelessness is not the only side effect of intractable family conflict. For some children, the risk of becoming looked after can also be a very serious consequence of family breakdowns. And that's why the Children and Young People Scotland Act places a duty on local authorities to ensure that families where a child is at risk of becoming looked after receive relevant services. And these provisions introduce a legal underpinning to early intervention intended to act as an early and effective support mechanism for families in early stages of distress to address preventable reception of children into care where that's appropriate. But the other groundbreaking change within that Act was to ensure that where young people are looked after, that they are able to stay in their care setting up to the age of 21. And there is no way, and I don't think any of us here would accept our own children having to simultaneously fill in housing application forms and also sit their standard grades. And through working with children's organisations like Who Cares, their loud and very clear message to us as a government was that we had to try and best recreate a stable, normal home for them, and that meant for them, us allowing them to stay in their care setting for as long as they could and to be supported as best they could as well. And through their direct involvement with that bill process, that's why we changed that Act. And those young people who were involved from Who Cares and other looked after organisations have left a lasting legacy for future generations of young looked after people in Scotland, and for that they should feel incredibly proud. But child poverty is also another area in which we're taking action, and we know that too many children in Scotland are affected by deprivation and poverty, and we know that there are difficulties and issues in coordinating support for these children and their families. Arguing about money in families is a common occurrence. Debt, paying the bills, paying for holidays or pocket money, these can all lead to stressful situations for many families. Unfortunately, we know that poverty levels are increasing in Scotland because of the harsh austerity measures being undertaken by the UK government, and one of the most depressing outcomes of this has been the massive rise in the numbers of people using food banks, and that includes also my own constituency, where we're having to see time and time again people do through their own good and charitable work provide for something that should be available by right. And it's clearly unacceptable that so many people in Scotland are living in food poverty, a point that we continue to make and press to UK ministers about the impacts that their decisions are having on Scotland and people in Scotland. And we've recently published a revised child poverty strategy in March 2014 with outcomes focused on what we call the 3 Ps, which is pockets, prospects and places. And through that we aim to maximise household incomes, improve the life chances of our children and provide sustainable places. The strategy includes actions across a variety of areas, and the approach was reflected in the commitments the First Minister made in our programme for government. So conflict is a part of our everyday lives, and for some of us that conflict can have devastating and long-lasting impacts, and relationship breakdown can lead to the permanent fracture of families, and yet many of us find it difficult to ask for help. It's really important, therefore, that we continue to make mediation easy, accessible for people, and that we help those in conflict to break down their misunderstandings, find some common ground and begin to rebuild their relationships. Today is about recognising the important work that the third sector provides for our communities, and that is supported in partnership by us and the Scottish Government. But more specifically, today is about recognising and celebrating the transformational change brought about by your work. You're doing life-changing work on behalf of the Scottish Government, and the people and families that you're helping will undoubtedly, I know, want to thank you for the work and the dedication and the commitment that you bring to society in Scotland. You are helping to create better communities and a better country that I hope will lead us to creating the best place for our children to grow up, but also as a country that's less accepting of conflict and more able and willing to talk openly about the problems that we face and to build on strong relationships and make sure that that's a lasting positive legacy for Scotland to build on. So thank you very much for asking me here today. Thank you very much for the work that you do. I don't know if I've got a bit of time for one or two questions. I'm not sure of my time. If I have, I'll happily take some. But again, want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I'm really pleased that we're able to work in partnership through this funding that we announced at the end of last year. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
MSP Aileen Campbell, children, young people, the time pressure is more yours than it is ours. So if you're able to field a question or two, yeah. I'd be delighted. Thank you so very much. To the floor, is there anything that we've got a great opportunity here, and we've really heard about this partnership working with the Scottish Government, the opportunity that lies ahead. There was some interesting and frank discussion before lunch, was there not? Is now an opportunity to open that to the floor.
There's a gap in the children and from 16-year-olds to there's a gap in the system from 16-year-olds to 18-year-olds that are unsupported, if they don't stay on in higher education, even if they go into modules, you know, the EMA stops at the age of 16 as soon as they finish high school, but they're too young to either sign on or get any kind of support to keep going. So these children are then, it's up to the parents to continue supporting them, but there's no support for the parents. There's no help for the parents to help support those children either. And I noticed that with my own 2 children that are now in their early 20s, especially with my daughter, because my son went on to uni, but my daughter didn't. She's got dyslexia. And when she found that she wanted to go on to college, there was no support.
Okay.
Is that being addressed?
Okay, I've got a number of points. So, I mean, unusually for the rest of the UK, in comparison to the rest of the UK, then here in Scotland we have continued the EMA in a way that hasn't been, but I understand that that might not be, from your perspective, necessarily providing the help that you need in the here and now. However, we have committed to maintaining the EMA, which has not happened in other places. So, and I think that's because we understood that there is a need to support families who do need it, and those children and young people who need it as well. In terms of another bit about keeping children and young people engaged in education, I don't have responsibility for schools, but what I do have responsibility for is youth work as well. And there was a report last year carried out which showed the real benefit of youth work, and it's about trying to make people understand across other parts of education the benefit a youth work approach can take, because they were finding that if you do apply those youth work methods, that you can keep young people engaged in education in a way that sometimes that formal teaching can't. So I think there is a need for us to be open and to make sure that the youth work sector are very much part of this closing the attainment gap as well as teachers, and that there's a parity there to make sure that youth work approaches do allow to keep young people, because if they're in school they can continue to be engaged. And actually in Scotland we have a really good we've got a really good record about our youth work approach. We had there's been like a 273% increase in youth awards since 2007. And also in that report, which is really useful to note, I think, in terms of a Scottish context, that I think largely because of this youth work approach, we've got far more young people in Scotland being socially active. So that's maybe doing their own volunteering as well. So I think that's a really good positive thing that we should celebrate as well. There is opportunities for all. There are the Communities Jobs Scotland as well. There are things in track to kind of help with that 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old. And perhaps if that's not fitting for you, it might be worthwhile maybe try and get in some of the specific details so that we can see if there is something out there that can help your daughter, because she should be able to access something that should allow her to be able to move into a positive destination, because that's what we want for our young people as well, in recognition that times are tough. The economy is not as buoyant as it has been in the past, and we need to make sure there are opportunities for all our young people, and that doesn't necessarily have to mean a route through to university. That should be around our support we offer to colleges as well. So I'm happy to take some of your specific details, but maybe some of that might kind of give a bit of reassurance and comfort that we're not losing sight of that 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old age group, which are needing support, need positive destinations, need help with finding jobs, but also families need support as well. And also the youth work, I think, is really important. It might be that you have people in the audience from that, or get them at a future date to come and tell you about their story.
Absolutely. Today is all about sharing that experience and making sure we connect the dots in the right places. One more question. I'm aware you need to move on, Minister. I want to say...
that's an easy shift.
We want to really make the shift as easy as possible, because it's through our partnership with the Scottish Government that we're able to really tie into and commit to what you have set out when we first met initially in April of 2014 in making this the best place for young people and parents to live and grow. And we are very committed, all of us in this room here today, to making that happen. So for your presence here this afternoon, I know how busy you are. Thank you very much, and for your continued support.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.